Hello, students, and welcome to today's lesson. Today we're going to be talking about perspectives on Christopher Columbus. As you know, we've been studying explorers, and we've been discussing why they've been going on explorations and the reasons for people migrating. Christopher Columbus was one of those explorers, and we're going to discuss him today. Before we get started, I have a bell ringer for you that I think will be very exciting. I want you to go back in time and think about your experiences in elementary school when you learned about Christopher Columbus. What did you learn about him, and how was his reputation presented to you? Was it presented to you in a positive or a negative light? In other words, was he presented to you as a good guy or a bad guy? And I also have some questions that I've written to help you come up with your response. Think about who he was. What's he known for? Why do we celebrate Christopher Columbus Day? And what do people think of him? I want you to write your responses to the Padlet that I've created for us. Here it is, right here. All you need to do is click on the link and write out your response, and we'll be able to see your response as well as your classmates' responses. Now that we've completed the bell ringer, I have a video for you guys to watch. I've inserted the link right here, so I want you to go and click on the video. And as you watch the video, I want you to think about this focus question. What does the video say about Christopher Columbus? Who was he? What's he known for? And what did he do? Why do we learn about him? Why are we talking about him right now? And when you get done, we'll come back and we're going to discuss some key highlights from the video. So now that you've watched the video, here are some key highlights that we learned. First of all, he was born in Italy in 1451. As a teenager, he became very interested in exploration and sailing. In fact, many people were interested in exploration during this time. People wanted to explore and go to the east, specifically China and India. There were many riches there, such as silk and spices, and they knew if they could go there and collect some of these riches, it could give them fame in their country, and they could become wealthy. They could make money, and trade was a big deal, as we've discussed. So Europeans wanted to explore. And Columbus was no different. He wanted to explore as well, but he actually wanted to find a westward route to Asia. In 1492, he asked permission from King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain if he could go on this quest. At first, they weren't so sure, but they granted his request and they gave him the financial support that he needed to set sail. Columbus and others didn't know, though, that there was another continent between Europe and Asia that was already inhabited by the Native Americans. That same year, in 1492, he set sail on his main ship called the Santa Maria, and he also had two smaller ships called the Pinta and the Nina. When they finally arrived on the land, they actually believed they were in Asia. Instead, they had arrived at the Bahamas, and Columbus claimed that land for Spain and named it San Salvador. And remember, there were people already living there, but he claimed it for Spain and he gave it a name. So, he had an interesting relationship with the Spaniards. The Native Americans had an interesting relationship with the Spaniards, and we'll learn more about that later. So as you watch the video, I hope you noticed that the video kind of brought to light an essential question. It didn't just give us information on Columbus's life and his exploration journeys. It also brought our attention to one essential question. What was this question? This question was Christopher Columbus a hero or was he a villain? Even to this very day, there's an ongoing debate about whether Christopher Columbus should be remembered as a hero because of his achievements, or whether we should consider him a villain because of his treatment of the Native Americans who were already living on the land that he discovered. Today we're going to read two sources. One source is going to be a primary source, and one source is going to be a secondary source. And they're going to provide conflicting opinions and information on Columbus. And we're going to analyze how they disagree with each other. So our learning target for this lesson is that we're going to analyze these two texts that once again provide conflicting information. We're going to figure out how they're different and how the authors disagree on the topic. I am learning to analyze multiple sources to identify how the sources present different perspectives and claims on whether Columbus is a hero or a villain. And as always, before we read, we want to determine our purpose for reading. So in this case, as I've already said over and over again, we want to determine the author's perspective, and we want to figure out how the two authors disagree on Columbus. So before we begin, we want to preview the text. So we already know that we have a secondary source that we're going to be looking at. But if I hadn't told you what it was, how would you know that it's a secondary source? Well, secondary sources are sources that were not actually written in the time period that the text is referencing. So the author doesn't have first-hand experience with the topic. That's different than primary sources, which are written by people who actually lived in that time period. So when we preview the text, we want to look at the title, we want to look at the headings, if there are any, if there's a summary, an introduction, or illustrations that we can use to predict what the text will be about. So let's take a look at our first text. It says Joel Barlow was an early American poet who lived from 1754 to 1812. The following is an excerpt from his poem, The Vision of Columbus, which hailed the explorer as a hero. So immediately we can tell this is the secondary source. Why do you think that is? Well, if you take a look, it says he lived from 1754 to 1812. Columbus set sail in 1492, so obviously this poet was not alive when Columbus set sail and discovered the Americas. So this is a secondary source. Another thing that we can notice is it says his poem talks about Columbus as a hero. So we can predict that his perspective is that Columbus is a hero. Our next text says Bartolomé de las Casas was a young priest who participated in the conquest of Cuba. He was eventually compelled to oppose the atrocities committed against the natives. So, as we read this, we can think back to the video that we watched, where we learned some information about Columbus and his relationship with the natives. Think about what that was. Did he have a fun, positive relationship with them, or were things tense? Well, when we watch the video, we know that it was tense. Columbus got there, and initially the Native Americans tried to be friendly with him and his men, but they weren't exactly interested in that friendship. And the Native Americans, as we learned in the video, endured brutal treatment from the Spaniards. So, we can predict that this is a perspective against Columbus. Also, we can predict that this is our primary source because it mentioned that De las Casas participated in the conquest of Cuba. So he was one of those men who helped migrate to other lands and discover things to trade. As you know, they mentioned in the video that when they arrived at the Bahamas, Columbus and his men were interested in the jewelry, the gold. So This is someone who experienced firsthand knowledge of Columbus and the Spaniards' treatment of Native Americans. So now that we have previewed and predicted the texts, I now want you to sit down and actually read the texts. And as we read, we're going to be filling out a graphic organizer to help us identify the author's perspective and the reasons for their perspectives. And here's what your graphic organizer looks like. So what you're going to do is where it says item number 1 and item number 2, you're going to write down the title of the sources. So of course you can shorten it because they were rather long. So let's say item 1 is Joel Barlow, and item 2 will be De las Casas. Our next section says, how are they alike? Well, they're alike because they're talking about Columbus. They're talking about his journey and their perspective on him and his men. So that would be how they're alike. And then here where it says how are they different, you're going to look at the texts, you're going to find reasons and evidence that the authors give for their perspective. Why do they believe the way that they do? Why does Barlow believe Columbus is a hero? Why does De las Casas believe he's a villain? So go ahead and read the text, and then we're going to identify one piece of evidence from each text together. So if we take a look at Barlow's text, it starts out by saying, this extraordinary man. So even if we hadn't seen in the title that he called Columbus a hero, if he's calling him extraordinary, we can make an inference that he's going to be talking about Columbus as a hero. So one thing I notice is that he talks about Columbus's great proficiency in geography, astronomy, and drawings. And it also talks about his courage and his perseverance. So if we go back to our graphic organizer, over here's Barlow, I would write down, he talks about his courage and his perseverance. Courage, we know, is a good thing. If someone has courage, it means that they're brave. They're not afraid to do something that is scary to most of us. And the word perseverance, think about what that means. If we go back to the video that we watched, what did the video tell us about why a lot of people didn't want to sail? So it mentioned that they were afraid of the sea. They were afraid of sea monsters, and exploration can be very scary. So Barlow is telling us that Columbus was courageous, he was brave, and he persevered through tough journeys to make his way to his discovery. Of course, he didn't know he would be discovering anything. But the point is, he wasn't afraid of the sea. He wasn't afraid to use his skills in geography, astronomy, and drawings to navigate and sail. And then if we take a look at De las Casas, it tells us the Spaniards grew more conceited every day, and after a while refused to walk any distance. They rode the backs of Indians, and they were as if they were in a hurry, or were carried on hammocks by Indians and running relays. So, a key word here, well, two key words. First, he mentions the Spaniards. That would be Columbus and his men. And then he mentions the word conceited, and he tells us all this stuff that they were having the Native Americans do for them, such as carrying them on hammocks. So we can use that context information to determine he's using the word conceited to say that basically they were full of themselves. Because think about it, they came to this land that the Native Americans were already living on. But they were treating the Native Americans as though it was their land and they were on their territory. So we could put over here, conceited. He says